The Supreme Court of behavioral data is A-B testing. A-B testing is awesome because it is a test, an experiment that is designed to meet all of the requirements of behavioral data. So we design an A-B test in which we take a control page, usually the page that's currently launched, and we make some sort of a change to it. That becomes a variation. An A-B test is designed so that, number one, it will be statistically significant. So you run an A-B test for a specific amount of time that you know is going to generate the number of transactions that will give you the sample size you want. You don't run it any less, you don't run it any more. Number two, you're collecting it over a period of time that is sufficient, so it is over time. You can set that date to make sure that you are covering at least the length of your business cycles, your sales cycle, or a seasonality aspect of your product. As a rule, you never run for less than a week because you've got weekday, weekend variation that will change as the test is running. It's data that is recent, so you run it now. It's going to be recent and applicable until some time passes. It's quantitative, so we are watching people use the site and measuring how many of them convert. So it's very quantitative, very measurable, no qualitative information in there. It is our prospects and customers, not pretenders. So we're watching our real customers as they're behaving. We're not asking their opinion or anything, and it's double blind, so the people that are using our site are actually solving problems while we watch. Half of them are using one page, the other half are using the other page, and we find out which one does the best job of increasing conversion rates. Furthermore, we're blind. We don't know anything about the people coming through. We have personal information in analytics or in our A/B testing tool, so they're just numbers, statistics, groups. This is beautiful, beautiful data. Now, A/B testing data is difficult to collect. That's why we save it for only our juiciest hypotheses that we have good support for, that we have some other data that shows us that this is really a problem. A/B tests can be difficult because, number one, you want to make sure you're isolating the variable and that you're creating a creative that is actually testing your hypothesis. It's easy to accidentally test something else, and sometimes we get sloppy and we put too many changes on a page. When that happens, we really don't know which change gave us a lift or not, or how they interacted. So we've got to be very careful. A/B tests can be expensive because if we have a treatment that reduces our conversion rate, reduces sales, well, that reduces sales. That means that while it's running, we're losing sales, and that can be expensive. We generally watch A/B tests to see if any of the treatments are really turning south, and if we feel like it's going to be too expensive, we will turn those variations off. It takes a bit of sophistication to design and implement an A/B test. The tools are amazing. I would recommend anybody get started. If you're using Google Analytics actually has an experimentation A/B testing feature in it now. It's relatively new, but it'll let you get your feet wet and try a few things, and it's integrated right into Google Analytics. So A/B testing is the Supreme Court. We want to save our A/B tests, our precious limited A/B tests, only for the best hypotheses. And I'm going to show you how to rank your hypotheses so that you're picking the ones that are most likely to move the needle for you. So we ran an A/B test with our automatic folks, and we wanted to test a hypothesis. Based on the feedback we got, our hypothesis was we don't need to list all of the features. We only need to list those that they understand and that are most important to them. And the feedback that we got from our thank you page survey really helped us understand that. So we designed a different kind of chart, a different kind of graph that allowed us to better communicate the fundamental differences and to help the visitors choose. So our A version in our A/B test was the old one, the control, which you see here on the left side, and the B version was this variation that you see on the right. Only 4 items per column. What did we find? Well, we found a 13% increase in conversion rate and a 24% increase in revenue per visit. Now remember when we were talking about the value of a lead, we talked about revenue per visit and why it's good to understand how much money is being generated per visitor to the site. And here you can see the 24% increase in revenue per visit told us two things. Number one, the conversion rate did go up. Number two, people were spending more because they were generating more revenue per visitor. And in fact, the reason was more people were choosing the more expensive pro version of the product, which is exactly what we wanted to happen. So a 24% increase in revenue per visit is really nice. A 13% increase in conversion rate is awesome. We'll take that all day and night. Thank you, A/B testing. You can use A/B testing to make big swings. Sometimes we'll take a big swing and we'll change a complete design. And I recommend that when we go into the world of redesigns, and redesigns are still very popular, but they're a little bit foolhardy because when you're using data, you never really stop redesigning. Nonetheless, they're happening, and so if you are contemplating a redesign, work with the designer to get some idea of what they're going to be designing and make sure that their design is going to perform well. So here is a home page. They wanted to do a redesign. We had recommended some things because when you look at the page on the left here, it's very difficult for the eye to understand what's important. This designer didn't do a good job of helping the visitor's eye find the important information. It starts up in the corner with that dark area and that bright pink banner. And then it goes down into the right there where there's another dark area. So the eye was going around the call to action box, which had the button which was a light colored blue, kind of a cyan, and the blanks were almost invisible. We thought that the redesign could really help this, and to make sure before we redesigned the whole site, we went ahead and changed the CSS so that the page would look differently and ran it through our A/B testing tool. And what we found is we could indeed get a 16% increase in conversion rate from the redesign. We added more white space, some separating bars, we used icons to draw the eyes, and we made the image in the upper left a little bit less drawing so that it didn't compete with that call to action box. So based on this, we might come up with a number of other ideas about design and maybe even further move the conversion rate up for that. This is the beauty of A/B testing. It gives us very, very solid information that the decisions we're making are actually going to improve things, and it tells us by how much. So how do we prepare for A/B testing? Well, as I've been saying all along, we want to save the very best, the most reliable ideas for our A/B test. And it's going to be this list that we've been working on all this time that's going to give us the answers we're looking at. So if you don't keep it open on your desktop, go ahead and open your prioritized hypothesis list. You should have, for a site, we will generally come up with between 50 and 150 ideas just in our initial calculations. And this includes things that we get from our clients. They may have ideas for what could improve things. We do interviews with salespeople. We do interviews with customer service reps. We read through chat transcripts. We read through ratings and reviews. That gives us a great set of hypotheses. Then, using our experience, we'll go through a best practices review, and we know that there's some things that often work on websites, and we'll look for opportunities to apply those. If the site isn't doing something well, then we'll add that to the hypothesis list. Now, caveat, there really is no such thing as a best practice. We've worked on sites that were almost identical in terms of the industry and the audience to another site that we've worked on, and things that had worked on that prior site did not work on the new site. Every audience is different. There's no such thing as a best practice, so don't rely on them, but add them to the list, because once we've researched them and prioritized them, we'll know if it's likely that they're also going to work for this client. So you've got your list open. You've been putting your ideas into that hypothesis column. Let's talk about how we figure out which ones are most likely to deliver. So the first thing we have to do is look at our idea list and most of them will not be written as hypotheses. Hypotheses are written in this form. If I blank, I expect blank to happen as measured by blank. So this needs to be very specific. This can't be if I redesign the website, I expect more people to buy as measured by the number of cars in my garage. That would not be a good hypothesis. So if you have ideas like that, that's fine. You need to tease them open. So why would I do a website redesign? Maybe I think that the site is dated, or let's say that I think the site looks cluttered. If we think about what that means, that the site is cluttered, what that means is that our designer didn't do a good job of guiding the eye to the important parts of the page. That's the equivalent of cluttered. You don't know where to look. So just as in our example when we were talking about A/B testing, that would be a great hypothesis. But the kinds of things you can do to decrease clutter fall into a number of categories. So you can say we would want to reduce it to one column. We would want to add white space around key information. We would want to remove some things from the page. We would want to take some of the information at the top and move it to the bottom so that people who scroll can see it without being confused. Each of these becomes a more specific hypothesis, and this is the way you should write them. So the hypothesis would be, if we add white space around this element and this element, we expect more people to stay on the page as measured by bounce rate. Now, bounce rate is not the best metric to use in a lot of situations. We generally like to test all the way through to lead generation, people signing up or buying something on the site. So most of our hypotheses have as measured by increase in revenue, increase in conversion rate, revenue per visit, etc. But if you are testing something like this on a homepage, you might want to test abandonment rates, exit rates, things like that. So this will take a little bit of work, and what you'll probably find yourself doing is when you go to research an idea, which you think you've written as a hypothesis, you'll start to think, well, how do I go and tease this out of the data? Or where do I go and look in the heat map reports? Or which pages should I go and look at for watching session recordings? And you'll naturally say, this needs to be more specific because this is too general. We're going to be doing some hypothesis creation on the call, so you'll get a little bit more practice on how that works. Ultimately, it will come out in the wash. So when you go to write your hypothesis and design your test, if it's too broad or you're changing more than one thing, it should become apparent. So don't get too wrapped around the axle, but this is the format that you want to write each of your hypotheses in. So once we have them in this format, the first thing I like to do is assign weights to them. And there are 4 categories that we use to weight a hypothesis that tells us what the likelihood that it is going to deliver higher ROI is. The first of those is proof. Now, when I do the first pass on the hypothesis list, I actually will put a number in for proof, but I know that I'm going to go back and probably change that number because I'm going to do some more research. But early on, for now, just use this scale of 1 to 5 to rate the amount of proof that supports that hypothesis. So if the hypothesis is, on our landing page, we want to change the headline from A to B. We want to rewrite the headline, and that we expect conversion rate to improve as measured by conversion rate. Yes, it's redundant, but that's a hypothesis. And if we saw information on an existing page that showed that there was a high abandonment rate, that would be a good level of proof. If we looked at the heat maps for that page and we saw that people weren't scrolling, that would be additional. And if we watched some session recordings and we found out that, yeah, people seemed to be confused, they were looking around and didn't know what to do, that would be additional proof. So that would be 3 sources. If we didn't have those sources, we could take that landing page, put it in front of a panel on Usability Hub, and ask questions about how the visitor would interpret that page, how they would solve a problem, where they would click, and we'll get feedback from those visitors about what's wrong with the page. So you could spend a great deal of time on each hypothesis collecting information around it, and I encourage you to do that. But at some point, you'll stop and say, I think we have all the information that's reasonable to collect, and if we don't have any proof, we'll rate it as a 1. Many at the beginning, many of your hypotheses will have a 1 or a 2. So things that are just gut reactions generally get a 1 in the proof because somebody's idea, that's a sample size of 1, so there's not a lot of evidence that it actually is going to be an issue. However, if you've done some research and you found a problem in analytics, that might get a 2. If you saw that it was more than one source, if you see evidence that this is a problem from more than one source, you would give it a 3. If you, for instance, find out that there was an A/B test done on this already and that you can see the results from the A/B test, that would give you a 5. That would be the highest value content that you could get. So this is a subjective number. Don't get too caught up on whether it's a 1 or a 5. Most importantly, you want to be consistent. So if you don't like my scale here from no proof to A/B split test, write yours in a way that you know you'll be assigning proof levels to the different hypotheses with the same sort of scale. Again, there's going to be 4 ways of weighting these. They're all going to be subjective, so don't worry about being completely accurate. The next weighting we do, and incidentally, there is a column in each of your spreadsheets that will allow you to plug these numbers in and get a weighting score. But expected impact is the next thing. And expected impact is based on your experience with online marketing. This is where you get to add what you think. And some things that can affect impact is the change above the fold, or is the change in an area where you can see in the scrolling maps that a lot of people are seeing, or is it in an area that you can see a lot of people are clicking? Those areas would be expected to have higher impact than something that's lower on the page. Is this a change that's in the footer? We would generally give that a pretty low impact because on any page there is a diminishing number of people that are making it all the way to the beginning. The impact can be measured by your experience, and as you're testing more, you're going to begin to understand what the hot buttons are. So does this hypothesis address one of those hot buttons? Well, if it does, you might give it a higher impact. Now, as a general rule, we like to use our estimate, our guess as to how much of a lift we think that hypothesis would, if we fix that hypothesis, what sort of a lift we would see from that. It comes from our experience, and again, as you get more experience, you'll be able to do this. But do we think that there really won't be much of an impact here? If that's the case, we may not really want to choose that one. And in fact, it should bubble down to the bottom of our list if we give it a low impact rating. Do we expect a 1 to 5% lift? That's a good lift. That's a bankable lift. But is there something more? Could we find one that was a 5 to 10% lift? We'd give that one a 3. If it's more than 10%, those are very exciting. We would give those a 4. And if it's something that we think is a game changer, something like adding ratings and reviews to an e-commerce site, then we would give that a 5 if it has a massive impact. Again, assign these consistently if you can, and especially on this one, make sure that your biases aren't getting involved. As you look through the list of hypotheses, there are going to be some that are your favorites. You're just going to want to do those things. Don't fudge your expected impact numbers up higher or any of the other columns up higher. See if you can catch yourself doing that, because what you can do is using your biases, give things a higher weight that won't actually increase the ROI. The whole idea of science is to remove ourselves from the equation and look strictly at what our visitors want and the data that we're collecting. So proof, expected impact, 1 through 5, 1 through 5. Level of effort to test. So as I said, testing is hard. A lot of times it will require developers and designers to get involved to generate the test scripts and the creative that is going to drive your test. Furthermore, it can be very expensive to implement. So for instance, these days with video really taking the internet by storm, we would often see video on our hypothesis list. add video, product videos to the product page, add video to the home page, place a video on the landing page. Now, video is a high impact piece of content, so it might score well on that. It may also score well on the amount of proof that it has, especially if you have invited people to look at a mock-up that includes video and it performed well. However, it's expensive to test because you have to go and produce a video. So that's going to take time, that's going to take money, and it's going to be expensive to implement, because if video does work, if product videos work on your product pages and you sell 10,000 products, well, even if you just limit it to the most popular products, you still have to produce video for all of that. A hypothesis like video would get a 4 or a 5 in terms of level of effort. However, if you're changing a headline, that's generally easy to do. In fact, you can often do that in the visual editors that come with the A/B testing tools. So you don't even need to get a designer or developer or any creative involved. That would be a 1. And in general, we use the scale of this. I can change this easily, usually a text change, swapping out an image, something like that. Or it might require some design work. We'll give that a 2. If it requires a subject matter expert and design and copyright help, then it will be a 3 if we have to get someone else involved, essentially. Do we need to get a developer in there? Then yes, that would be a 4. And if this is going to take a major effort, we would rate that as a 5. Use this list or make one of your own so that you will consistently add the 1 through 5 to your hypothesis list and assign them somewhat uniformly. And the final group is the traffic affected, or how important is the page that the hypothesis addresses. This can come in a couple of forms. So number 1, based on the amount of traffic that's coming to the page, we might give it a high score. So the home page is typically one of the most trafficked sites, pages on any site that we're dealing with. That would probably get a 4 or a 5. A change that addressed every page on the site, like a change to the primary navigation, would definitely get a 5 on this particular column. Also, though, traffic that is in the checkout process. These are people who are really close to buying. They're just completing a checkout. Now, their numbers will be small on most sites, but they still might get a 4 or a 5 in our rating because they're so important. This traffic is so important. So we can rate the traffic or the importance of the page based on quantity or the quality. Sometimes we'll give traffic to a landing page a higher rating for traffic affected, just because it's expensive traffic, that there's an ad campaign that we're paying for all of those clicks. So that helps those hypotheses that address the really important pages, the really important visitors, to bubble to the top. So we've gone through and we've rated each of our 4 things on a scale of 1 to 5. Our magical formula over there will give you a weight for each of these hypotheses. So we've taken our hypothesis list. We've weighted each of the hypotheses based on the amount of proof that we see, the level of effort that we think it will take to test and implement that hypothesis, the level of impact that we think that will have. In other words, how much of a lift do we think that change will generate for us if it in fact wins in a test? And then which traffic is it addressing? Is it addressing pages with lots of traffic, or is it addressing our important traffic? Once we have it ranked, we can sort our table in Excel and we can find out what our most likely winners are. This is going to start to dictate where we go to test and where we start. Now, in general, when we're dealing with an e-commerce site, a SaaS site, or a site that is asking someone to register or subscribe, there's 2 broad areas that we can address. We can address the end of the funnel. In other words, we can optimize and choose hypotheses that address issues in checkout, issues in the registration process, issues in finishing forms. Those are end of the funnel. Or we can address hypotheses that funnel people into that process. In general, we don't want to optimize the end of the funnel until we've done a good job of driving as many people as we can into that process and then optimizing to get them the rest of the way through. Because the more people we get in, the faster our tests run there at the end of the funnel, where traffic is generally smaller. So that's one of the things, the strategies that we would look at. But what we want to do is get a little bit finer idea of what the overriding problems are. So each of our hypotheses will fall into one of 5 buckets. And if we assign this bucket to each of the hypotheses, we begin to understand what the overriding issues are on our website. I'm going to take you through those buckets, and we discussed them in the first section, but I'm going to take you back through them because now you've got this list in front of you and things are going to start making sense. Just to review, messaging and value proposition. The words, the images that communicate the value of your offering, your service, your company, or the product on the page that they're on. How good a job do you do communicating that? Any hypothesis that addresses the words, the images, or some component of the value proposition. Hypotheses that talk about moving things around, putting white space around things, making things bigger, making things bolder, making paragraphs shorter so that they're easier to read, increasing font sizes. Any of these fall into this category of layout and UX. Credibility and authority. What are you doing on the page to communicate credibility and authority? As I've said, design is a great way to communicate credibility and authority. So is that a credibility issue or is that a layout issue? Depending on how your hypothesis is worded, you might put it into either bucket. But things like trust symbols, where we're borrowing trust from other brands, or we're using media outlets to help build our credibility and authority. Anything that we say about the business and how long it's been in business would build our credibility and authority. How many people we've had as customers, how many we've sold of a particular item. This all works towards building credibility and authority. Any hypothesis that hypothesizes that we should add social proof or make social proof more evident would fall into the social proof bucket. Adding testimonials, adding ratings and reviews, customer logos, anything that shows that someone else has used our product and probably been happy with it. And then hypotheses that make us feel safe giving you the credit card, that make us safe entering our contact information and things like our phone number and our name. These are security and risk reversal hypotheses. So our 5 buckets, if we go through and assign our hypotheses to these buckets, we should look at the top and we'll see there's a predominant number of 1 or 2 of these buckets, that the highest ranked, the most likely to deliver ROI hypotheses fall into these categories. And you're beginning to see where you're falling short with your visitors at a macro level. In other words, these are issues that we'll address and address the concerns of the broadest part of the market. And it's very, very insightful. This will also generally dictate the first round of tests. What you'll probably want to do is take your highest ranked test from the number 1 bucket and your highest ranked test from the number 2 bucket. Try those things and see which one of those ideas moves the needle. In other words, which one delivers a win and by how big. When you see, for instance, at the top, you've got messaging and value proposition, a lot of hypotheses in that category, and also a social proof, that there are a number of hypotheses in the social proof bucket, then you know that you should test one of each, maybe the most likely to win. If you can find a page where you can test both of those. And let's say that social proof wins. Adding social proof was a big winner. You might then choose some additional hypotheses from that category, even if you might skip over some of the higher ranked hypotheses. Because remember, our ranking it's a great tool, but it's subjective. So once you get the tiger by the tail, you want to hang on. When you see a hypothesis that is in social proof win, you ask, can we double down on this? Can we continue to increase social proof and make that person feel like this is a company that other people respect and enjoy their products and services? We've got a ranked hypothesis list. It's been a lot of work. This is generally a 30 to 40 day process here. As you become a stronger scientist, you will spend more time wrestling with your hypothesis list. But now that it's sitting in front of you on your desktop, what a good feeling. Now we can start picking things to A/B test, and we know that we're going to be able to test the things that are most likely to win. Now, I don't want to set any expectations that all of the tests, all of the hypotheses at the top of this list are going to win. In fact, prepare yourself, because most tests will be inconclusive. They will not show a winner. Most of them will not even show a big difference between the different ideas. Gird yourself for that. Be patient. Get through those inconclusive tests, because sometimes they come early. And dive in. Dive in. Now's the time. I have for you a test planner. You will have gotten that in the emails as part of the course. This will just guide you through what you need to consider when you're putting together an A/B test. It starts with a hypothesis, but talks about things like how long will the test run, when will the test start. You can paste creative in there to show what the difference is. And this document can stay around as evidence of what you tested and the results that you got. What's the source of the traffic that's coming? What are any other issues that you should consider in evaluating the test? Because when we're done with the tests, we're going to go back in analytics and look and see what other things happened as a result of our test. What other segments behaved differently inside our test. Volunteer. So a couple of things. We're going to be designing some A/B tests on the call this week. We have some volunteers who are going to offer their hypothesis list, and we're going to talk about what we would do to test something. And talk about issues like this, how you isolate a hypothesis. So take a look at this. We've got 2 pages. The hypothesis here is if we change the headline from Debt Relief That Works to Free Yourself from the Burden of Debt, that we'll see an increase in leads generated by this page as measured by conversion. There are 2 variables that are changing on this, though. Can you tell what the 2 variables are? What else is changing? Well, the headline changed, the words changed, and the number of lines that the headline occupies has changed as well. That's 2 variables. Now, how can that be really a big deal? Well, if you think about it, moving the content down lower on the page means certain people, especially those that aren't surfing full screen or coming on a tablet, may not see all of the same information as the people coming who see the single line. So this is an example of accidentally testing 2 things. Number 1, testing the different words, and number 2, testing a 2-line versus 1-line headline. So these are the sorts of things you want to catch. And you're going to have to make a call here. So in order for you to test these 2 things, are you going to have to reduce the font size of one or the other? Ideally, you would reduce the font size of both. Or are you going to make some other change that keeps the content from changing, from being pushed down? And it's just an example, kind of an extreme example of the sorts of things you need to look at when you analyze your A/B test. Are you changing more than one thing? Because once you do, you never really know which change was going to be the one that gave you the lift or even the inconclusive result. One of those could give you a lift and the other offset it. What a heartbreak.